This actually doesn't have an expiration thing on it. I feel safe. Hey, I'm Maybe Burke, and you're watching Makeup for Lost Time. This is my series for trans women and other people who feel like they missed a few classes when it came to learning about makeup. So last week we talked all about contour, and today, as promised, we're talking about bronzer. And if you missed it last time, the difference between contour and bronzer is the undertone of the pigment you're using. So last week we were using cool tones to make shadows to set back some of our features. And today we're going to be using warmer tones that will make us look a little more sun-kissed. I'm actually going to use my very throwback Wet n Wild contouring palette that I should have thrown out years ago. It's probably very expired at this point. This actually doesn't have an expiration thing on it. I feel safe. And the reality is bronzer is going to go in a lot of the same places that contour does, just a little bit adjusted for how it's going to sit on the face. And so if you remember when we were contouring, we went right under our hairline, right under our cheekbone, and right under our jawline. There are a lot of different ways you can contour the face, but as a general rule, those are 3 primary places that people will contour. And with bronzer, we're largely going to do the same thing. But I'm going to start on the cheeks so we can see how it's a little bit different what I do. So when we were contouring, we came in right under the cheekbone, right? So that we gave a shadow and the cheekbone is lifted above that shadow. Since bronzer is a warm tone, it's still going to bring things forward. And so we actually can go right up on that cheekbone with the bronzer to give us that sun-kissed little warmth to our cheeks. And now this color is quite dark for me, but I'm using it as an example. And you'll see I kind of tapped that in, and then I'm blending it out by just softly putting my brush in circular motions. And so you'll see that that really gives my cheek a little bit of dimension, a little bit of enhancement, but it's not necessarily making a shadow under my cheek. The bronzer is hitting my cheekbone where the sun would and where I would get a little tan. So then I can do the same thing right along my hairline. And this gives the illusion of us being a little tanner. But in reality, you can see on the side of my face I didn't apply bronzer on. The makeup falls pretty flat when it's all one shade and your face is not necessarily looking like it normally does. So bronzer gives us a little more color, a little more variation, and makes things a little more interesting looking, but also looks more realistic. And then of course, we can always bring bronzer down under the jaw as well. And here you can blend up to and down from that jawline. We weren't going to blend up with a contour, but with a bronzer, you can get away with it. Now on this side, I'm going to use a lighter shade that's a little more appropriate for me so that we can see what it looks like when it's a little more subtle. I'm going to tap in that bronzer and blend it out a bit. And you'll see it's not quite as drastic as this side is, and it really melts into the rest of my face and makes a smooth blend to give me a little more color. You might hear folks referring to this as warming up the face, and it's a way to just make sure that our makeup isn't falling flat if our foundation makes our face all one color. And along the hairline here is adding that dimension, especially if you don't like having a lot of your forehead exposed, or if you're self-conscious about the size of your forehead. Adding this here can make your forehead look smaller. And we're going to come down under the jaw as well. Ooh, my earrings. Ooh. And so around the perimeters of the face, we have a little bronzer now. I'm taking an empty brush that has nothing on it and just going over the places that I don't want a lot of bronzer to kind of help make that smooth transition and make sure there's a nice blend. I'm purposely using a powder bronzer today because when we contoured, we used a cream, and I just want to keep some variety with the type of products we're using. You can use either. You can use both. You can use a cream under a powder to help it last a little bit longer. We want to avoid only putting something on our cheek and not putting it elsewhere on our face because that's where it looks really unnatural. If we only have bronzer on our cheek and it's not up on our forehead, it's not anywhere else on our face, it's really gonna stand out that we just have this like one strip. Even if it's blended well, even if it's fitting our skin tone and everything like that, it's still gonna look a little out of place. The last thing I'm going to hit is my nose. Now, we talked last week, I don't contour my nose. I'm not gonna play that game. But I am going to just hit it with a little bit of bronzer so that it's cohesive, that understandably my nose is further out than the rest of my face. My nose would get hit by the sun as well. And that's all. You can use bronzer in your eyeshadow as well. If you're using a shade that works really well for you, it'll also work really well in your crease and as a transition color. But just a little bit of bronzer can really make your makeup look a little more polished and a little more cohesive. We can add blush in with bronzer, and we'll cover that in the future, but it also works great on its own. And especially for folks who don't want to spend a lot of time doing their makeup, throwing on a little bit of bronzer is really helpful in making it look like you have a full face, if that's the aesthetic you want. And that's your bronzer crash course. I'll see you next time we make up for lost time.